What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Man, if God was writing Green Lantern right now, is what it would look like right now. If God was man, let's have some church right now. If God was writing Green Lantern right now, this is what it would look like right now. This is one of the best stories that I have ever read. God, this story is amazing. This story is absolutely insane. It is so cool because it takes like what we think about superheroes, right? And like it turns it on its head. It takes everything that we think about superheroes and just like flips it over. Like the crazy thing about superheroes, and it happens to a degree, but the crazy thing about superheroes is that like historically speaking, there's like some enemy that shows up and they're like, oh my God, this enemy who's really powerful, like there's no way we can beat him. But somehow like they come together against impossible odds and they win, they save the day. No, that's not what happens. That's not what happens in here. The whole first book of Sinestro Corps War is just like, run, flee for your lives. It's the coolest thing ever. It's just like, find a place to hide, just go somewhere, anywhere that's not here. Like it's one of the coolest things ever, because remember, in the prelude video, we talked about how like the Sinestro Corps was like always in the background. The Sinestro Corps was always like mustering up its forces in the background. There were just times when it would just show up in different stories. We would just have like a page somewhere and it would just say, you have the ability to instill great fear. Welcome to the Sinestro Corps. And then that would be it. It would just go away. It would just vanish. And the idea was that it was building towards something big. Man, is it a sight to behold. It is amazing. God, this is so good. The whole thing is that when the Sinestro Corps was officially formed, they like raided Oa. I mean, it was just ripping apart the Green Lanterns. And that's what's so cool about this, because like Superboy Prime escaped and like Cyborg Superman's gone. The Anti-Monitor is allied with the Sinestro Corps. Imagine all the worst things that could happen with the Green Lanterns. That's what Jeff Johns writes in the story, in the first part of the story. Because initially it's all just recuperation, right? I mean, like, you know, on Oa, it's the idea that they were just totally wrecked by the Sinestro Corps with no expectation that it was coming. And that's the great thing about this, is no one knew it was coming. No one had any idea it was there. They were just, you know, meeting together, and then suddenly it was bam, everybody just shows up. These members of the Sinestro Corps just show up and just start crushing everybody. And so at this point, it's just like, okay, fall back. Let's see if we can't get our forces together. Let's see if we can't figure out what's going on. But in the midst of all this, like it's something like 55, 56, the number just keeps going up. The numbers of lanterns slain just keeps going up. And that's the whole thing, because what they say here is that like on Oa, the assault of the Sinestro Corps is basically stopped because they were there to capture Kyle Rayner. I mean, it wasn't expected, but when they found him there and found him as the host for the willpower entity and the emotional spectrum, they snatched him up, took him to Quard, you know, in the antimatter universe, and then they backed off. But across the universe, Green Lanterns are dying everywhere. And that's what makes this so cool, because it's like this huge encompassing opera with everything that we see going on in this story right now. Keep in the back of your minds, Green Lanterns across the universe are just dying. It's one of the coolest things in the world. Like, you just see these numbers just cranking out, you know, occasionally it's just, you know, 67 lanterns dead, or so on and so forth. You see rings fly by, Green Lantern of sector such and such deceased, searching out viable replacement, or whatever the case may be. Now, the other half of this is the Book of Oa, and that's what makes this so cool, because remember, the Book of Oa serves as both a general guide as well as a chronicle of everything that's gone on and the whole history of the Guardians of the Universe, the Green Lanterns, all the forces they faced, Sinestro falling from grace, all that kind of good stuff. But the idea is that there's also the prophecy of Blackest Night. Now, the cool thing about this is that if you just suddenly jump into Sinestro Corps War, you could still kind of, you know, get a general idea of what's going on, but it's a lot more fulfilling, and there's a lot more meat and potatoes to it if you go through and start reading the stories beforehand, which is why I always tell people, if you're going to read Green Lantern Corps and read Green Lantern, go all the way back, you know, really to Rebirth, and just work your way forward with regards to the whole Hal Jordan and Green Lantern mythos. But what this does is it tells us that while all these Green Lanterns are sitting around and dying, the Guardians of the Universe are more or less playing politics. Now, we kind of expect that to be the case, right? Like, we expect with the Guardians of the Universe that they're going to be playing politics, they're going to be doing their thing where they're going to be engaging in bureaucracy and talking about what they should do and all that kind of good stuff and how things should happen and function and so on and so forth. But remember, the original idea of the Guardians of the Universe is that they would cast their emotions aside. They would basically say, we are devoid of all emotion whatsoever. Now, of course, again, we know right now, just because of DC Rebirth, the last will and testament of the first Lantern, we know all that deals with the fact that they were basically basically taught how to harness the emotional spectrum by Volthoom, and began to realize that tapping into their emotions was too extreme, and they basically cast them aside and made themselves just totally devoid of any real feeling whatsoever, believing that strictly rational thought would be the only way to go. But the idea was that with Abin Sur being the Green Lantern predecessor to Hal Jordan, which is to say the guy that basically gave Hal Jordan his ring, Abin Sur had been told by Atrocitus, the head of the Red Lantern Corps, of the prophecy of Blackest Night. Now the funny thing about this is the question that, that Ganthet and Sade have, because remember, the Guardians never usually take names, so it's basically Jeff Johns' way of saying these two are going to play a very important role as we go on throughout the Green Lantern mythos. But the argument that Ganthet and Sade have is, look, if the rest of the Guardians consider the prophecy of the Blackest Night to be nonsense, if they consider it to be just this sort of a scare tactic that was used by Atrocitus for the purpose of weakening the willpower of Abin Sur through fear and then using that to defeat him, then why in the world did the Guardians of the Universe record it in the first place? It would be like if I came to you and I said, oh man, like the planet's gonna blow up tomorrow, and you're like, whatever, that's nonsense, I don't believe a single word of that, and then you started making arrangements in case the planet did blow up. If you didn't really think it was real, then why are you making these arrangements in the first place? And so what this does is it basically reveals to us the idea that while a lot of these different Guardians are more or less purged of their emotions, on a very fundamental level, on a very personal level, they're terrified. They're terrified of the idea that the prophecy of Blackest Night is real, that it's true. Because if it is, it means those Guardians are all gonna die. It means the Green Lanterns are all gonna die. It means there's gonna be nothing but death and destruction across the universe forever and ever and ever and ever. And so again, it's the idea that they're basically faced with their own mortality. And that's one of the reasons why I love this little piece of writing so much with Jeff Johns, because it begs the question, if you were a race that had basically been around for billions of years, and then were suddenly forced to face the idea that you're not as omnipotent as you think you were and that you can die just like anybody else, would you really be prepared? Or would you be absolutely terrified? Are you so used to living that you can't imagine not being alive? And so again, with help from Ganthet and Sade, Hal Jordan is basically informed that of course Kyle Rayner is being held on Cord, the home base of the Sinestro Corps, at least at this particular point in time. Now, keep in mind here, Hal Jordan is kind of like this Green Lantern that fell from grace. He's still considered to be like the best of them in terms of what he can do, how he uses his ring, the fact that he's like, first one in, last one out. That whole element makes him one of the greatest Green Lanterns among them, but there's a lot who don't trust him. Because remember, back during Emerald Twilight, following the destruction of Coast City by Mongol and Cyborg, he felt such a rush of fear that he was basically taken over by Parallax, the embodiment of fear within the emotional spectrum. He went forward as a villain. He basically laid waste to the entirety of the Green Lantern Corps, killed the Guardians of the Universe. For a lot of Green Lanterns out there, they look at him and what if it happened again? And that's one of the crazy scenarios. That level of trust just isn't there anymore. And it never really will be. I mean, the Lost Lanterns, the ones who were believed to have been killed by him, only to have been taken by Cyborg Superman and used for experiments, eventually being rescued by, Hal Jordan and Guy Gardner and so on and so forth, they specifically will never trust Hal Jordan again. But they constantly keep reminding everybody of the time that Hal Jordan became a bad guy, the time that Hal Jordan was evil, and so what goes on here in the middle of all this is that when, Guy Gardner and John Stewart and Hal Jordan go to charge their rings in order to break the interdimensional barrier and travel to the antimatter universe and access Cord, we suddenly end up finding out that the central power battery's basically been booby-trapped. And that's the coolest thing, because for years, back before Jeff Johns took over, the idea was that Green Lanterns were just weak to the color yellow, but nobody ever knew why. It was just something that they were just weak to it. It wasn't until Jeff Johns came along and said the Guardians of the Universe discovered Parallax to represent the very embodiment of fear. They can find him inside the central power battery, which in turn is the reason why Green Lantern rings were weak to fear in the first place, weak to the color yellow in the first place. Parallax was eventually freed, the yellow impurity went away. What it did is it created this kind of scenario where it's like Parallax always had a back door into the central power battery. Not only that, you also have to keep in mind, Kyle Rayner was the host for Ion. He was the host for Willpower. He's part and parcel to the Green Lanterns themselves. And so while I wouldn't go as far as to say that the central power battery is like an arm or a leg for Kyle Rayner, it's not that much intertwined in who he is, he's still very much a part of the fact that it basically came back. And so he's almost able to sort of enter and leave as he wants to, but creating this sort of booby trap is perfect, because what it means is that any Green Lantern that goes to charge their rings will get a direct shot of fear into their bodies. Because remember, the central power battery is this massive source of energy, this massive source of willpower. So it would be like you sticking your finger in an electrical socket, except instead of electricity, you feel a rush of fear. And that's exactly what happened with Hal Jordan, where he's normally able to overcome great fear, where he's normally one of the best of the Green Lanterns. He immediately experiences this massive rush where he's basically forced to relive the death of his own father. And what this does is it allows Kyle Rayner to appear as Parallax and basically begin the process of taunting Hal Jordan while whisking him away to the antimatter universe of Cord. Now, something else to point out here is is that we get a couple instances here and there of Green Lanterns who are either trying to make their escape, who don't really know what's going on, who aren't aware of the fact that the Sinestro Corps is attacking, and once they do show up, they're just totally obliterated. And that's the crazy thing about this, because remember, the universe is a big place and it takes time. When you have the Sinestro Corps launching a surprise attack, then it takes time to basically marshal forces together, to get information out there, to let people know what's going on. And so by the time some of these Green Lanterns realize what it is that's happening, they're suddenly ambushed by like 50 members of the Sinestro Corps and they have no hope of escape. Now, that's something else that I want you to take note of here, is because we end up having Sinestro traveling back to his home planet of Karuger. And the reason why this is so important is because of the fact that he basically visits Saronic Natu, the girl who took up, his own lantern, his own Green Lantern ring, and became the Green Lantern of Karuger. Now, with her character being elevated to this position, it brought in one of two possible scenarios. The first was that she never wanted to be a Green Lantern in the first place, just because of the fact that she remembers when Sinestro ruled over Karuger and how dictatorial he was in his policies. But the other half of this is that it terrified her because she believed that people on Karuger would view her the same way, that people would look around and say, oh, we have a savior up there in the form of a Green Lantern who's not Sinestro. Like, she'll lead us to the promised land. She'll give us a better society. She'll solve all of our problems for us. And that's what she was terrified of, because one of the things that's kind of hit home when it comes to the Green Lanterns is that the people that are best suited to be Green Lanterns are the people who know how to confront their own problems and know how to deal with their own problems, hence the necessity of willpower, the willpower to overcome such overwhelming odds and cope with them as best you can. But for Saronic, her fear is basically becoming Sinestro. Now, really at this point, it's just a matter of the nature of the Green Lantern rings and the fact that she's just not as capable of a fighter as Sinestro is. Now, when I talk about the nature of the Green Lantern rings, there's an instance when she tries to kill Sinestro. The problem with this is the ring stops her, because one of the big weaknesses of the Green Lantern rings is that initially they were designed as a peacekeeping force as opposed to a war force. And so the issue with this is that where she tries to take out Sinestro, the ring immediately realizes her intention is based on hostility, her intention is based on a desire to kill, and it keeps her from doing that. And that's the reason why so many of these Green Lanterns are dying, because they're playing defense when they should be playing offense, because they don't have a choice. Their rings will not allow them to kill. Their rings will only allow them to defend. And so that's why this whole first part of the story is just running and hiding, defending as best they can, keeping the Sinestro Corps at bay, because the Sinestro Corps does not have that limitation. Those rings allow its wielders to just kill whoever it is that they come across, especially if they're Green Lanterns, because remember, the Sinestro Corps feeds on fear. It's powered by fear. What better way to really, continue powering the Sinestro Corps than to just incite fear everywhere you go by killing Green Lanterns in front of people, by killing them all over the place. And so some of these lost lanterns try to face off against Parallax as best they can, but at the end of the day, they're not really able to pull it off on their own. And so what ends up happening is the group actually takes up residence underground. They really just kind of scatter to a couple different areas, but Hal Jordan, Tomar too, they actually end up taking up residence, or at least coming across a woman by the name of Lysa Drac. Now, if you're reading Hal Jordan and the Green Lanterns from DC Rebirth, she's very familiar to you. You saw her in the first arc, Sinestro's Law. She's a character that dates all the way back to Jeff Johns' run. And she was originally introduced as just like this chronicler of the Sinestro Corps. She basically kept the Book of Sinestro, the Book of the Yellow Lantern, or the Sinestro Corps. It was just like the Book of Oa, except that it chronicled everything from the Sinestro Corps side. And so again, what this does is basically just give us this massive conflict, again, outside of Hal Jordan himself, this massive conflict from all these different lanterns all across the universe, all trying to stem the flow as best they can, but at the end of the day, not being able to hold off all these members of the Sinestro Corps. Now, of course, with regards to Hal Jordan and his guys, remember, this is not them engaging in conflict to kill. This is them trying to rescue people where they can, trying to grab those who have been captured, trying to save those Green Lanterns who are out there in no man's land that don't know what's going on, or are else ambushed by a ton of Yellow Lanterns. Recon and contain. That's all this is. That's why there's action, but there's really more of like dialogue, because it's like, what in the world is going on? Everybody trying to get a grasp on the situation. Now, with regards to the Guardians of the Universe, again, what they start doing is talking about the idea of rewriting the Book of Oa. Now, the reason why this is so significant is because the Book of Oa is designed to be this sort of guaranteed promise among the Green Lanterns, right? Like, it's this idea that like, no matter what any Green Lantern does, no matter what takes place, their accomplishments, their failures, those who fall from grace, those who achieve great things, their recordings will go in the Book of Oa. It literally exists exists to just chronicle everything that goes on with the Green Lantern Corps. And so while some of these members of the Guardians of the Universe talk about rewriting the Book of Oa, the concern of Ganthet and Sade is they're going to write out the prophecy of Blackest Night. And so what that basically means is these Guardians would be tantamount to sticking their head in the sand like ostriches while all hell just unfolds around them, believing that if they just ignore it, then nothing will happen to them. But that storm's coming. Either they can face it and be prepared, or they can hide from it and be eradicated. And so the idea is that from Ganthet and Sade's perspective, it's we gotta face this. Like, we gotta be prepped. We have to realize this Blackest Night is coming. And when it does, hell is coming with it. We have to be prepared for this. And the other Guardians are just like, no. If we ignore it, it'll go away. And so the idea is that if they rewrite the Book of Oa, they'll basically remove the prophecy of Blackest Night, pretend like it's not there, despite knowing the fact that it will be coming the entire time. It's going to be there the whole way. Now, of course, again, back with Hal Jordan and his guys, all they really do here is just like free Guy Gardner and John Stewart, but Jeff Johns actually begins the process of going through and introducing the notion of a singular lantern wielding multiple rings. Now, something to point out here is this had not really been touched on since the days of Emerald Twilight. That was really the last time we'd seen anything like that, with Hal Jordan taking all the rings of the former Green Lanterns that he defeated, and just kind of using those rings for his own purposes, sort of supercharging his own Green Lantern powers. That was really the last time we had seen that, but it set the stage for what Jeff Johns is doing now, because suddenly we're going to start seeing Green Lanterns wielding more than one lantern ring. We're going to see people like Kyle Rayner who are the embodiment of all the rings. So we're going to see like all these crazy scenarios with all these different characters. Now, the other half of this is the Anti-Monitor. And really with the Anti-Monitor, at least, in the inner sanctum of the Sinestro Corps, the Anti-Monitor is of course going through and kind of experimenting on the whole, on Ion, the living embodiment of willpower, sort of, trying to either torture it or gain information, or at the very least, see if it can be, corrupted and transformed into something else. The motivations I don't think are entirely explained here, but it's the Anti-Monitor. So we know that whatever it is that he's doing, it's bad. It's just, villain stuff. But in the middle of all this, Hal Jordan, the other Green Lanterns, those who are left, they all basically sort of race into the scene. They end up, grabbing the embodiment of willpower and racing off, because at this moment in time, the perspective of the Green Lanterns is that if the embodiment of willpower is destroyed, willpower will go with it. Now, we know that's not the case, but at the time, they don't know that. At the time, all they know is that if the embodiment of willpower is gone, then there'll be nobody to resurrect the Green Lantern Corps. And that's the reason why that's so important, because with Kyle Rayner, he was Ion. He was the host for willpower. And so when he was replaced as the host for Parallax, what that meant was that the Ion Whale was just kind of floating out there in no man's land somewhere. But if the Ion Whale's destroyed, there'll be nobody to resurrect the Green Lantern Corps. They'll all be killed off, and that'll be the end of that. And so really one of the most important things to do is to grab the host, to grab the whale, and get out of there as fast as possible. And that's what they do. They all basically kind of grab these things, just race off. But in these last few moments, what the Guardians do is they emerge from the central power battery, from their own, little haven in there, so to speak. And they basically say, we've rewritten the Book of Oa, and we now have new laws. Chief among them is the idea that the Green Lantern rings are now capable of lethal force. The Green Lanterns are now able to kill. And that's huge, because the Green Lanterns can't believe it. They're just kind of like, wow, but what choice do the Guardians of the Universe have? When you're a Guardian of the Universe, you look out and you see that Sinestro, Thal Sinestro has formed his own Sinestro Corps, his own Lantern Corps, and he's just laying waste to every single Green Lantern that he comes across. What choice do you have? The Guardians of the Universe sit down and say, we don't have a choice. If we're going to defeat the Sinestro Corps, we have to fight fire with fire. And so from this point going forward, the Green Lantern rings have now had the whole hold on lethal force. That's been removed. The Green Lanterns are now allowed to kill members of the Sinestro Corps. With that being said, guys, if you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. Sinestro Corps War. God, this story's so good. And yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.